Welcome to the Real News Network. I'm Sharmini Pierce coming to you from Baltimore. Early Monday morning, the Iraqi military, with the support of Kurdish Peshmerga fighters, supported by U.S. air power and special forces, began a major offensive to retake Iraq's second largest city, Mosul, from the Islamic State. Mosul has been under ISIS control since June of 2014 and is a place from which ISIS leader al-Baghdadi first declared the caliphate of the Islamic State. While reports indicate that U.S. special forces are taking part in the offensive, Army Lieutenant General Stephen Townsend, the commander of the Combined Joint Task Forces in Iraq, said only Iraqi troops would be involved in the liberation of Mosul. Let's have a look.
Earlier today, Iraqi security forces launched their counterattack to liberate Mosul from ISIL, also known as Daesh. This operation to regain control of Iraq's second largest city will likely continue for weeks, possibly longer. Iraq is supported by a wide range of coalition capabilities, including air support, artillery, intelligence, advisors, and forward air controllers. But to be clear, the thousands of combat forces who will liberate Mosul are all Iraqis.
Joining us now to analyze the latest development is Larry Wilkerson. Larry is a retired United States Army soldier and former Chief of Staff to the United States Secretary of State, Colin Powell. He's also an adjunct professor at the College of William and Mary, where he teaches a course on U.S. national security. Larry, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me, Sharmini.
So, Larry, the war in Iraq was declared over several times now. First, when President Bush infamously declared the mission to be accomplished. Just a few months after that, in 2003 invasion, he did it again. Then again, when President Obama said all U.S. troops were being withdrawn in 2011. Now, after 13 years, the war in Iraq still seems to be going on, with 5,000 some troops there involved in an offensive against ISIS. What do these developments tell us about the U.S. presence in Iraq?
First thing they tell us, Sharmini, is that we shouldn't have been there in the first place. I think the invasion in 2003 was a strategic disaster on a par with Vietnam. That said, this battle that's looming for Mosul to eliminate ISIS from all the Nineveh province and Mosul city itself is a serious complication, if you will, or a serious movement. First, in the effort to kick ISIS out of Iraq, and then second, in the effort to resume some sort of even a modicum of stability in that country. And I think, as General Petraeus pointed out in the Washington Post not too long ago, the aftermath is going to be far more difficult than the battle, though the battle is probably going to be tough. Getting things stable and politically able to do anything in the aftermath with all the different groups there is going to be a real challenge, such that Iraq has been all along.
Now, just how deeply is the U.S. involved in the current operations? As you saw in that comment, the Lieutenant General was telling us that the ground troops, Iraqi ground troops, will be on the front line of all of this.
I think we're looking at the entire coalition, if you will, there. We're looking at Peshmerga from the Kurds. We're looking at Shia militias, advised probably by Iranian counterparts. We're looking at Sunnis. We're looking at the more or less polyglot forces that have composed those that are fighting in Iraq against ISIS, and that's one of the problems. Once the victory occurs, we're looking at Sunni, Shiite, Christian, Shaka in terms of religions, and we're looking at ethnic groups, Arabs, Kurds, Yazidis, and Turkmen among the most prominent. And they're each going to want their share of what is left after Mosul is returned to Iraq. This is the same problem, intensified, if you will, in Nineveh province and in Mosul, Nineveh being the surrounding province. that we have in Iraq writ large, though. We've got this inability to establish a political equilibrium with so many groups antagonistic towards one another from the very start because of ethnic or religious differences. And then looking to not just share power, but to have the lion's share of that power, particularly the Arabs and the Sunnis in particular within that group, because they dominate population-wise. So this is going to be an enormous challenge, not unlike that writ large, as I said, across the entire country of Iraq. Having political leadership, having a single leader or a council or whatever they decide on as a governance process or a governance entity is going to be difficult, because it's going to have to balance the interests of all these different groups and balance the fact that some of them have really, I won't say formidable, but better armed forces than other groups do. And they're going to have to get the foreign influences as much as is possible out of there, particularly those that are advising or are actually composing some of the military components. So I wouldn't want to be the person trying to put this political structure together that's going to try to bring harmony amongst all these various groups.
And of course, one cannot ignore the impact this has on the civilian population, this kind of warfare in Mosul. What kind of tragedy do we expect in terms of human suffering here?
I don't want to minimize it, Sharmini, but I don't think it's going to be as formidable as some have painted it. I think ISIS is going to make a show and then they're going to leave. I could be wrong, but I think ISIS is on the run everywhere. I think their strategy is swiftly changing from one of holding territory and building a caliphate to let's get out of here and let's do what we can to disrupt our enemies through terrorist attacks, improvised explosive devices, and other such measures that we saw Abu Musab al-Zarqawi and others like him use in the past. I don't think they're going to want to hold much territory anymore, because, frankly, they've been roundly defeated on much of that territory. And this will just be another place, arguably one of the most important, where they'll be defeated. But any kind of fighting with this kind of coalition, even with tactical air controllers on the ground directing U.S. and French and British airstrikes precisely, and I do mean precisely, at individual targets, at machine gun nests, at anything that they can identify and illuminate, these bombs will come in with about a 99% first-round hit possibility. So I don't think they're going to hold on, but this kind of fighting in built-up areas like this is the toughest kind of fighting in the world, and it is usually a heavy producer of casualties, particularly on the assaulting forces. So if ISIS wants to stick around for a little bit and inflict some casualties, they certainly can.
Right. During the last presidential debate, Larry, Donald Trump made a major point out of the fact that this offensive had been announced well in advance, and said that making an announcement like this is really incompetent, he said. And he was alleging this, I guess, in order to counter Clinton, saying that, she would go after Baghdadi and so forth. What do you make of the pre-announcement of this?
Well, that's pure nonsense. Militarily or politically, for that matter, it's pure nonsense. You want to announce in this case because you want as many innocent civilians as possible that might have an avenue of escape or might have a way to protect themselves to do so. There's no intelligence needed on anyone's part in the area to know that the Iraqi forces are going to mount a major offensive, indeed are at this very moment, I suspect, on Mosul. So that's a preposterous comment. And I say it's preposterous politically, too, because Mr. Trump ought to know that it's a preposterous comment, so it's not going to help his political possibilities at all, and it may hurt them.
Right. So then, Larry, what's next? What should we be looking out for as journalists covering this?
I'd be looking at, one, what ISIS does to continue more or less on an al-Qaeda-like track and where it does it. Is it in Libya? Probably. It's already there. Is it in Syria? Yes, it's already there. Is it in Iraq as it can make some inroads? Yes, it's already there. where else might it go? Might it go to Algeria? Might it go to Morocco or Tunisia or even to Egypt? Egypt is looking very fragile right now. Or might it even go into Israel? That bastion of security and inability to carry out a terrorist attack might suddenly look as fragile as Swiss cheese. I mean, it could go wherever it wants to go now and take up a routine and a strategy and tactic operations that are more like Al-Qaeda than territory holding ISIS, and continue on its internet and otherwise media campaign to recruit and incite people all over Europe, the United States, and wherever to carry out more or less domestic actions, but in its name. So in many respects, I'd rather see them formed up in battalions and beaten badly on the battlefield than scattering and going out to do their heinous activities piecemeal in countries all across the globe. That's not a positive development, except for the fact that we're kicking them out of Iraq and will eventually kick them out of Syria in terms of their organized formations on the battlefield.
All right, Larry, I thank you so much for joining us today, and we'll have you back next week, and hopefully there is something more peaceful to report with you then.
Thanks, Sharmini, and let's hope that the battle is over by that time and ISIS is on the run.
All right, thank you so much for joining us on the Real News Network.